Welcome to the Kintsugi Heroes Podcast, where we share inspirational stories of everyday people going through different challenges and how they overcome them. Please be aware that the story you're about to hear may have moments of deeply felt emotions and personal experiences. If anything you hear has a triggering effect, please reach out to someone who can help keep you safe. If you love this conversation, we'd love you to like and share it with your friends so we can continue to share more inspiration and hope to as many people as possible. Now, listen up for our next hero story. And today's conversation is with the remarkable David Moran. And I say remarkable because of the way that he lives life and, exudes this confidence and this positive mental attitude. He's so strong. And yet you hear his story and you realize that he has been through so much. As a young boy, a teenager, he loved sport and he was into all the different sports and he just wanted to be a professional sports person. Then he was diagnosed with a very rare disease. It's called Fairbanks Disease, and it affects the growing ends of the bones. He was told, you've got to stop playing sport. He had to change his focus and he tried different sports to try and remove or limit the movement, but eventually all sports were off the table. To date, he's had, I think it's now 40 surgeries to replace joints and bones in his hands and his feet, all the joints of his body, because they wear out. And he lives with pain. He lives with issues in being able to move. And this is a disease that is actually genetic as well. And he's just got such a can-do attitude, regardless of what he's going through physically. I found him remarkable from that perspective, and it was a real heartwarming story. He's a beautiful man. I love this conversation, and I know that you're going to enjoy it as much as I did. This is David Moran. Well, here we are. It is another episode of Kintsugi Heroes. I'm here with David Moran today. How are you going today, David?
Yeah, very well, thank you, and thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. I always like to thank the guests, obviously, for coming. It's great that we have this platform, but I especially like to honour you for showing up and sharing a story that is challenging. Obviously, I don't know your story, but I know that it takes courage and vulnerability to be able to share a story. Thank you for doing that. It does help people. It gives people inspiration, and it's a great thing.
Thank you.
Well, let's get started, shall we? I'm going to hand the mic over to you and ask you to take us back to the beginning of your story.
Sure. So my story begins when I was in early high school. I was just starting my second year of high school. I was in between sort of 12 and 13 years old. In the 2 or 3 years leading up to that, I had experienced a lot of pain in some joints, and so I had my sister, who's 6 years older than I, and we had both seen various doctors and started to investigate what was happening, and we'd had some confusing diagnoses, which is not good when you're sort of going through those informative years, going out of primary school and into high school, and I was really enjoying my life at the time. I was the captain of the cricket team at school, captain of the football team. I played tennis. I did weightlifting. I did swimming. I was a very sport-orientated kind of person. But during all those activities, I'd started to run into some difficulties. I'd never been a great runner. That wasn't my thing, but I had great hand-to-eye coordination. And so, various doctor's appointments happened, and, I remember going to a new doctor, and both my parents took me along, which was quite unusual. Normally my mother would deal with all those things. And we sat down with this doctor, and I can remember it as clear as it was yesterday. And this is, 47 years ago now. And he said that I've got this condition called Fairbanks multi-epiphyseal dysplasia, and that I would need to adjust my life to be able to live with that condition. And a lot of what he said after that, I don't remember. My parents were both, very questioning and all that, but I went into this, all I heard was he will need to stop playing sport, need to certainly no tennis, no football, no cricket, swimming, maybe, definitely no weightlifting. And that's really all I heard. After that, it's hard to remember, but you sort of go into a bit of a fog, and, you're going to school and telling everybody that you can't do the things that you were doing, and it's an enormous loss when you're 13, going through all those other life changes that early teenagers bring on. It's quite a significant loss that you're dealing with. So I dealt with it by changing my focus. And I thought, well, if I can't play football, cricket, tennis, all these things I love, and it was immediate. It wasn't like, let's think about this for the next month or whatever. It was the next day. I had to stop all that. I adjusted fairly quickly, and I took up golf, which seems ridiculous now, but at the time it seemed logical. Golf's not a contact sport. It's a lot easier on the joints. And because my parents, back then, none of us really understood what exactly this problem was. So I took up golf, and I became pretty good at it over the next few years. From 14 to 18, I did very well. And I got to the point where I was a sponsored junior here in South Australia, and I'm old enough. I was sponsored by a cigarette company, believe it or not. And I was able to travel around South Australia and parts of Australia and play golf, and thought it was the best thing that could ever happen to anybody. I was eyeing off being a professional, but then around about 17, I had my first operation, serious orthopaedic surgery. And that was on my left knee. If you know anything about golf, you put a lot of strain on your left knee. And my left knee decided that was enough, and I needed to have an operation. So I had my first surgery in between 17 and 18. And that was a cartilage repair. Lots of people have these operations now, and it's keyhole surgery, and you're in, and about 4 hours later you're out of hospital. But back then, when I had that operation, I was in hospital for 3 weeks. The other thing that we didn't really know at the time is I have what they now call hypersensitivity to general anaesthesia, and the general anaesthesia made me extremely sick. And so I was in hospital for over 3 weeks for that knee operation. Didn't make me give up golf because when you're young and stupid, you don't do that. So I went back to golf, and I got my handicap down to scratch or zero. Don't know how many people understand golf, but I was really looking forward to a career in golf. I was examining the pathways to become a professional and all of those things. But then my right knee collapsed, and I had to have a right knee operation at 18. I was also, at the same time, running my own business. I bought a small cleaning business, and I was doing that. And I was working on somebody's factory, and my right knee collapsed underneath me and I had to go to hospital. My surgeon came into me after the surgery and again, I got very, very sick with the anaesthetic and he came in to me after the surgery and he said, look, you need to consider what you're doing because if you keep going down the pathway you are with golf, especially, you will probably be in a wheelchair before you're 30 because you will not be able to sustain, your body will not sustain that sort of exercise and your knees will fall to bits and the only options will be, crutches and then a wheelchair. So I gave up golf at 18. Again, experienced all that loss. I still feel that loss today. I was talking to a person on the weekend and I said, given the opportunity, I would be out on the golf course right now. But I couldn't do that. So I gave up golf and then being 18 and still pretty stupid, I decided to take up table tennis. And you think back now, what the hell? Why? But I had to do something. So I took up table tennis. A friend of mine was playing district table tennis. Took up table tennis. Within 2 years, I'm playing A-grade district table tennis, state level. And I went in for another knee operation. Again, my left knee couldn't cope. And the doctor said to me, seriously, what are you doing? Just think about this. There's only so many operations that can be done to preserve your knee. And if you keep going down this path, it's not going to be good. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. And, the ultimate result of all that will be, medical devices, dependence on others, and, so not much fun. So it was about this time that I actually did the thing that I probably should have done 6 or 7 years earlier, and I started to learn about the condition I had. And so what Fairbanks multi-epiphyseal dysplasia does is it's a genetic condition that means that every joint in my body, except for my spine, for some reason, it ignores the spine, is never formed correctly at all. So in utero, your joints are not formed in a normal way. And each rubbing surface is, instead of a smooth rubbing surface, it's a very rough, misshapen surface. And this immediately from the moment you are born means that every movement you make, these uneven surfaces destroy the connective tissues within your joints, with the exception of the spine, as I said. And quickly you are in a position where you have no connective tissues, your tendons, your meniscus, all these types of things within your joints disappear, and you are walking bone on bone, every finger, every shoulder, elbow, toe, everything is like that. And I thought, okay, well, the doctors, the doctors told me a few times that, this is my path and it's probably time I start believing that this is the truth and, start taking some action. So I sold my business and that was not done very well, very professionally. I just gave it away basically. I'd spent 5 years taking a business that was turning over $8,000 a year, and when I sold it, it was turning over $350,000 a year. And I gave it away because I just thought, well, I can't do it. I can't spend the time worrying about it. Just had a baby and, wanted some calmness in my life about these things. So I just gave it away and I started working for, a fast food organisation. So then the consequences of that are I'm on my feet all day. And at the time, I thought I was doing the right things. I gave up golf, table tennis, I gave up sport, everything. And I took up a job where I wasn't working so much, up, down, round and round, ladders, all of that sort of stuff. I was working in a fairly, for my mind, calm environment. And then within the first 5 years or so, I started to get extreme pains in a hip, my left hip, and I ignored that for a lot of years. I went to the doctor and he said, yeah, your hip is wearing out. Now, I was in my late 20s by this stage, and he said, the consequences are going to be this. A hip operation means, breaking, putting new bits in, steel, ceramic, blah, blah, blah. We can do that once. Maybe if you're very, very lucky, we might be able to replace that hip replacement, 10, 15 years down the track. And after that, we will break your hip. You will have no parts of the hip left, and you will be immobile from that point on. And for me at that time, that meant from about 45, 50 years old, I would be, completely dependent on somebody else. And that's not a nice thing to hear when you've just heard, you've just had a baby, you're building your life, you think you've done the right thing in adjusting all your life styles to make accommodations for this illness. But the doctor goes, well, no, you haven't done everything you can, and these are the consequences that's going to happen. So I put off having the hip operation because the consequences were you have the hip operation today, you've got 10-ish years where that will work. Then you might have another 10-ish years after that if they can redo it again. So the longer you can put it off, the longer you extend the possibility of being in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. And you have to remember all this happened 30-some-odd years ago. We didn't have the technology then that we have now. So I put it off and put it off and put it off. And eventually I was working in retail. And my days would go like this. I would get up in the morning. I would take a lot of pain medication. I would have something to eat and I would go to work. I would work all day. I would come home in the afternoon. By the time I got home, my body was so sore I literally could not get out of the car. I would beep the horn. Whoever was home would come out, assist me to get out of the car. I would go inside. I would get straight into bed, take more medication that would hopefully put me to sleep, have something to eat, go to sleep, and then get up the next day and do it all again. And that was my life for many months. And I always look back at that now and go, that was a really crazily stupid thing to do because it made me miserable and it made everybody around me miserable as well. Around about 1996, I'm 30-ish now. I had my first hip surgery because I couldn't put it off any longer. My lifestyle was nil. I didn't have a lifestyle. Everything was dealing with pain. And I eventually gave in and said, right, I just have to get this done. So I went in the hospital. Again, I had a general anaesthetic, and this one nearly killed me because when you're allergic to those types of medication, it gets worse each time you do it. So I was intubated for 4 days. I couldn't breathe, etc. I didn't know any of this, of course, because I was unconscious. And yeah, it was, not a good time, but I did get my hip replaced. And luckily I had a great surgeon here in Adelaide who used the absolute latest and greatest technology to put into my body. And that turned out to be a great thing. So had my hip replaced. Within 2 years, I had the other one done because the other one started to hurt. And I thought, I'm not going through all that again. So I got the next one done. And one of the things that people don't realise or don't think about is each time I have one of these operations, that's 6 weeks I have to have off work as a minimum. And you don't, when you have the lifestyle that I have and you've got the illness I've got, you don't have a lot of spare sick leave because you've used it up. You don't have a lot of spare holidays because you've used that up. So quite often you're having 6 weeks off without pay, without any other financial support. You can't get insurance for it. And so you're on your own. And like sitting here today at 60 and a half, 61, since my first operation, just before I was 20, to today, 40 years, I've had 39 major surgeries, and I'm already booked in for number 40, which will be a full right knee replacement on the 17th of May. So if you just took 6 weeks and go, okay, 6 weeks each time without paying, 6 weeks by 40, that's 240 weeks. That's 5 years that I've spent without any financial support and things like that. So it takes a massive toll on your psyche, your finances, everything. Within a couple of years, I had both hips replaced. I had 2 children by this stage, both of which I passed this illness on to. So I've dealt with that as well. One of the best things I did during that period, though, was keep studying about the illness and find out what was happening in the world around this illness. It's very rare. When my sister and I were diagnosed in 1974, we were the only 2 known cases in the Southern Hemisphere. Now there's many, many thousands of us that know that we had this diagnosis. And there's a full genetic study being run by one of the big hospitals in London. And we send genetic material to them every 5 years, my whole family does, to assist them to try and study more about this illness. But it's not like cancer where everybody's raising funds to do studies, because that's just not what it is. The most famous person with this illness is probably Danny DeVito. He has this illness, and whenever I see him and I see his movements and the way he walks, especially, I see myself. So going back, I'm 30-ish. I've had both my hips replaced, and I've been either dismissed from a job or, ushered out of other jobs. People don't want to say, look, we don't want to take responsibility for if you hurt yourself, or we don't want to have to keep worrying about you taking more time off. They don't say things like that. But, you hear people talk to you differently, and, prejudice is an interesting thing. I've heard it and seen it, and it's awful what people will say. And I'm sure they're doing, well, for the most part, people are doing it because they're trying to do their best for them and for you. But it doesn't change the fact that they are biased against you for something that you can't do anything about. And I guess that's one of the reasons I'm very, very, very careful, cautious, interested in the dynamics of prejudice and bias and things like that, because I've had it in my life. I've had people go, well, hold on, do I trust you to do that? Because what happens if this? And you go, well, hold on, it's all fine. So, so once I'd had both my hips replaced, I had 2 children, and I passed this illness onto them, and one of them has had children. She's got 2 children, and she's passed the illness on to one of those children. So my daughter, for example, this illness is a lot worse for females than it is for males, and that's just a true statement. It's not biased or prejudiced, it's just true. And the reason it's true is because of the hormones that females have that males don't have related to childbirth, mean that their joints are going to become looser, rub and scrub and make more damage to themselves just because they do. So my daughter had both her hips replaced before she was 25. So, there's all that stuff to deal with as well. So, over the next number of years, I then had, multiple surgeries. I'm sitting here today, I've had both hips operated on 4 times. I've had 26 knee operations. I've had both shoulders done 3 times. Just 12 weeks ago, had a full shoulder replacement on the right side, and they had to do what's called a reverse replacement because I have no connective tissues left. So instead of a ball on the arm joint, which goes into a socket in my shoulder, I now have a ball on my shoulder, which goes into a socket on my arm. And the only thing holding that together is the 2 main muscles in my arm. So I've had to retrain those muscles to hold my shoulder together. Whilst all that sounds not great, I don't want people to think that it's all awful.
Sorry for the interruption. This is Ian Westmoreland, the founder of Kintsugi Heroes, and thank you for listening to this story from one of our amazing heroes. Our mission is for these stories to provide hope and inspiration to people experiencing life challenges, and to also educate the broader community on how best to provide support. If you would like to help us to continue to produce more hero stories and cover more adversity themes, we would welcome all donations. These can be made via our website, kintsugiheroes.com.au. The donate function is at the bottom of the homepage. We'd also welcome any feedback. You can email me direct using ian@kintsugiheroes.com.au. Now let's get back to the story.
I think one of the other really positive things I did around about 30-ish was my sister and I were asked if we could be mentors to other people that were given this diagnosis. And of course, my sister and I both said yes. And so we had the opportunity to give our information to others who were given this diagnosis, and wanted to talk to somebody who'd been through it. And that's a really, really good, positive thing to do because it makes you think about all the good things that have happened in your life, and it helps you help others. And that's a wonderful thing to do. So I did that. I only did that for a few years, but it was a great thing to do, and it really taught me a lot about myself and more about this illness because it makes you become properly informed, and it allows you to help some other people understand that yes, this is not great. It's not, but it's not the end of the world either. And this was a hard thing for me to come to grips with. I really didn't come to grips with it until I was in my 40s. And I remember this as clear as if it was yesterday, because, when you're a little bit different and when you're going through surgeries and when you've got a lot of pain in your life, sometimes you just get overwhelmed and just go, why the hell do I have to put up with all this? And I was sitting on my bed one morning doing my routine to get out of bed, because it is a bit of a routine. And I thought, you know what? I get to choose. I get to choose when my feet hit the floor this morning, whether I'm going to be a positive influence on myself and everybody around me, or I'm going to be a negative influence. And I can get up and I can whinge about how much pain I'm in, and I can carry on about how, I lost my career. I wanted to be a professional golfer and I lost that. Or I can get up and do the best I can with what I have. And I remember thinking, well, there's really only one choice. I've got to get up and I've got to do the best I can with what I've got. So I got up, and it took some time and some practice to keep being able to do that. And look, I still have bad days, as everybody does. But it took me a long time to practice to make sure that when my feet hit the floor in the morning, I try to be the best positive influence on myself and others around me, rather than just focus on the bad stuff. Because in the end, focusing on the bad stuff is not going to achieve anything positive. All you're going to do is make yourself bitter and twisted, and it's going to have a negative influence on those around you. Whereas if you make a different choice and go, no, I'm going to be the happiest, brightest, cheeriest, move forward type person that I can be, then that has an influence on you, and it has an influence on the people around you. But it is a choice. You have to choose it. And it's not an easy choice. As I said, I still have some crummy days. But if you make the choice, it becomes easier. And then you keep making it over and over and over and over again. It becomes easier to make that choice every day. So I then went through my 30s, 40s, 50s. I saw my children grow up and struggle with this illness. But, technology moves on. So when I was due for my second hip replacement, my original doctor, so my fake hip, my metal and ceramic hip that he had inserted into me, had worn out, and they do. That's just the way it goes. My original doctor had retired about 3 months before then. So I asked him to recommend somebody else, and he said, nope, not going to do that. I will not recommend somebody else, because then if you go to that person and it doesn't work out, it becomes my fault. And I went, yeah, that's actually right, yeah. So I said, so what do you recommend? He said, shop around. So I did. I went and visited 8 different orthopaedic surgeons, and then I narrowed that down to 3. I went back and saw 3 orthopaedic surgeons, and then after the second visit, I sent them all a questionnaire based on the things that I cared about, and only one of them answered me back. So he's now my orthopaedic surgeon, has been for over 20 years. Lovely gentleman by the name of Rob. And he now does all my lower body surgeries. And he's operated on me over 20 times in the last 20 years. And I have another gentleman, because things become really specialised. My original surgery did my whole body, toes, ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, everything. Now I have a different surgeon for toes and ankles than I do for knees and hips, than I do for shoulders and fingers and fingers and stuff, because these people become highly specialised in really doing a great job. So I picked a surgeon, young man by the name of Rob, and he did my second surgery, second replacement, and it turned out that he was actually trained by my original surgeon. I didn't know that when I selected him. It was only after I'd selected him as my surgeon that I talked to him about who had done my previous surgeries and all that sort of stuff. And he went, oh, let me tell you about that. So it turned out he was trained by my original surgeon, and it turned out my original surgeon had actually done a wonderful thing for me that I didn't know. He put the absolute latest and greatest, right up to the minute technology in regard to hip prosthetics inside me, so that when I was due for a replacement, it became not as bad as we originally thought. What they were able to do was to just remove the rubbing surfaces, so the ball and the cup, and put in new ball and new cup, and make all the appropriate adjustments and everything. And and for that surgery, I was in hospital for a grand total of 3 days, and recovered and back at work within 4 weeks, as opposed to the first one where I was in hospital for 3 weeks and didn't recover and didn't get back to work until after 12 weeks. So, technology moves on. I had this shoulder replaced 12 weeks ago, and it's like it never happened. Technology is amazing, and the things they can do are just unbelievable. Things that I wouldn't have thought of. And one of the main things that have worked for me is the progresses in anaesthesia. So I as I told you, I have what they now call hypersensitivity to general anaesthetics, but so I never have general anaesthetics anymore. I have cocktails of drugs that the anaesthesiologists and I have worked on and developed, that work for me, nerve blocks and these types of things. So now, instead of not waking up from a surgery or waking up feeling like, somebody has flattened me with a truck, I now wake up as if I'd just been to sleep. I'm ready to eat. All my body functions are fine. With this surgery on my shoulder, my pain score never went over 1. The other thing that I probably should have told you half an hour ago, I have what's called hypersensitivity to opioids as well, so I can't take painkillers. So the last time I took an opioid, I had a Panadine Port, which a lot of people would be familiar with, and it put me into a coma for 4 days. So I can't take any of those. But again, as technology progresses and medications progress, there is medication regimes that I've worked on with my team that now give me wonderful cover for pain relief throughout all these episodes. So I take a mixture of things every day to keep me okay. And whenever I'm leading up to a surgery, there's a 2 or 3 week lead into that surgery. A whole heap of things that are done on the day before, the day of, and the day after to get me set for a really, really well-managed recovery. And quite often people, even nurses, come into my room the day after a major surgery and go, "What's your pain score?" And I go, 0. And they go, "Are you sure?" Because, they know they haven't given me any pain relief, and they know I've had major invasive replacement surgery, and they go, "How can that be?" But, if you work hard at it, you can do these things. So I guess we're pretty close to where I am today. So I'm 60, going to turn 61 in September. I've had 39 major orthopaedic surgeries in the last 40 years. I'll have my 40th on the 17th of May, and I will have 41 somewhere out there in the future. I can already feel like my next one is a full right knee replacement, because my guy who does my lower half of my body, Rob, he said to me 2 years ago after my last knee repair, he said, "Next time when you walk through that door, point at your right knee, there's only one choice, and that is to replace it. There's nothing left to do to make it any better. There's just nothing left. So the next time you walk through that door and point at your right knee, we're replacing the whole thing. So that happens on 17th of May. And I can already feel that my left hip might need some attention within the next year or so. Not sure. I've got a couple of toes that I'll do. I've got the middle finger on this hand needs to be done in the next couple of weeks. I'm just holding it off. I've got to position it correctly for when it will recover to support me to have the knee operation and all that sort of stuff. These are the games I play in my head. How long am I going to have to recover from that before I have to do that sort of thing? So, So I'm fine. Everybody says to me, how are you, Dave? And I go, I am, I think, one of the richest people in the world, because every day I do what I want, when I want, how I want. I run my own business in mental health. I support people's mental health all day, every day. I'm mentally healthy named badge there. I eat what I want, I drink what I want, I do what I want. So I've got wonderful kids, grandkids, house, family, I do what I want. I don't think there's anything that you could have or that I could have that would make me any richer than the ability to do what I want when I want. Right? What else do I need? I know I positively affect thousands of lives every year because that's the feedback I get through our business. And yes, I'll have a full right knee replacement on the 17th of May, and then sometime in the future I'll have the next one and the next one and the next one. My shoulder surgeon asked me after the last operation, how does that actually feel, Dave? And I went, well, there's really two answers to that. One, yeah, it feels great. And I said to him, it's an adjustment I have to make in my head, because now when I move my shoulder, there's no pain. He went, yeah. I went, hold on, I don't think you understand. What you've given me is a gift that I haven't had in my whole life. Every single time I've moved my shoulder between, when I was 12, 13 and now, there's been pain. And now, today, there isn't. So that's the first part of the answer. The other part of the answer is, how am I? I'm great. I am blessed to live in this time of human advancement where I can come to you and say, this hurts, chop it all out and put new bits in, please. And you just go, yeah, no worries. Come and see me next week. And I just walk in, you and your machines do your thing, and I walk out with no pain. So I am blessed. I really am lucky, because the people in my history who passed this illness on to me, my mother, her father, going back, they didn't have that. The only thing my grandfather had to support him was alcohol. And he used alcohol to numb his pain. And I understand why he did it. But he didn't have the opportunities I've had. And what will be the technology of the future? Will my grandkids' be able to have their genes altered to eliminate this before they're even born? I don't know. But what I can tell you right now is I feel blessed to be living in a time where within, if something broke today, within a reasonable period of time, I would have that thing replaced. And that thing that it's replaced with will remove the pain and last longer and be better than the thing that they took out. And that's something that I'm very, very thankful for, because it's made my life easier and my sisters and my children's life as well. So here we are.
Wow. That's the first thing I've got to say. You're like this modern medical miracle. You know, you're this walking poster boy for medical and technology and innovation, aren't you? To a degree.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and it is a bit of a joke with some of the people I know. Here comes the $6 million man. And it's pretty close. I don't have the X-ray eyes. I don't know if that's even possible. Certainly, I can move it. Like, I spent all day yesterday training people how to support others with their mental health, because I can. I can get up. My legs will work. My arms will work. Because of this technology. It's just, it's amazing. And yet you have to think about, 100 years ago, 60 years ago, my mother didn't have that opportunity. I do.
So did your mother have this as well? You talked about your grandparents.
Yeah, with my mother, it was very difficult for her because she contracted polio when she was very young. My mother's first 9 years, 8 of those were spent in hospital because she contracted diphtheria and she was put into hospital and isolated because it's very contagious. And then while she was in hospital, she was due to be sent home. And on the day that she was due to be sent home, the hospital were doing all the things to send her home. They realised that she'd contracted polio while she was in hospital. And they rang the grocery store around the corner from my grandparents' house, because nobody had a phone, and said, can you go around and tell Mrs. Nelson that her daughter's not coming home? And the grocery store owner said, yeah. And he walked out the front door, and my grandmother was standing out front. Even though it was still 2 hours before her daughter was meant to come home, she was already standing out front waiting for the ambulance to arrive, because she hadn't seen her daughter for 3 months. And then the next 6 years, my mother spent in hospital, and she saw her mother once a month for an hour and her father once a week for an hour. And that was her first 8 years. And then she came out of it and she had polio. And so all her joints and that were, because she walked with quite a significant limp. She had significant, deformities of, other parts of her body, especially her feet and ankles. But she never ever complained, ever, because she said the same thing. If it wasn't for the iron lung, I wouldn't be here. She was in an iron lung for months. But she said, if it wasn't for that iron lung, I wouldn't be here. Think about the kids 100 years ago, didn't have the opportunity to be put in an iron lung. The only thing she complained about was soup, because they gave them soup every day. They had to eat it. And her and her friend, who we called Auntie, in the bed next door, always swore they would never eat soup again once they got out of hospital. And she didn't. People would offer her soup and she would politely decline. No soup for me, thanks. But, yeah.
What a journey that you've had, your family's had. Just incredible, David. I do have one question. You mentioned that it took you a few years to wake up, so to speak, from your initial diagnosis as a teenager, and that makes sense, right? You're a teenager, you obviously were sporty. You love sport, and how devastating it would have been to have to finally come to terms with not being a sports person. After that, was there a point at which you figured out how you needed to construct your life? Like, was there sort of a moment where you went, you know what, I finally realize now that I can't live a normal life like everyone else, and I've got to do things a bit differently?
I don't think it was any one moment. I don't think I I still don't think I'm over the loss of some of it. As I said, just last weekend, that loss came thumping back into my head. So I don't know whether you ever get over it. I think you just get better at dealing with it. And there have been moments, and I've relayed a couple of those moments, but the changes in lifestyle were all, okay, well, this is the next step, and this is the next step. I'm giving up that, and I'm going to be doing that. But, the critical moments were, and I guess the absolute one was sitting, looking, and I went to a doctor who I didn't know. I was on a business placement to Port Augusta, which is in the mid-north of South Australia. And I went to this doctor who I didn't know, and I specifically chose somebody I didn't know. And I walked in and he said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Because I just feel awful." And he said to me, "Let me see if I can guess." I went, "Okay." He said, "You eat too much, you drink too much, you smoke, you never exercise." I went, "Yep, all of those." He said, "Cut out any two of those, you'll feel a lot better. Anything else?" I went, that didn't go the way I thought. And I walked out of his room going, "Yeah, I get to choose." And I did. Like, weight has always been a problem because you can't exercise. That thing that people say, move it or lose it, that's counter to everything I know. Every time I move, that's another step of loss because another bit of bone breaks off or another piece of pain comes or whatever. Every time I move. The only profitable exercise I can do is non-weight bearing, so it has to be in the pool. But people will still say to you, "Well, why don't you just do some exercise?" Or what if you did some exercise, you could strengthen that. And you go, "Okay, let me tell you a story." So I don't know if that helps. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it's very, very interesting. It's fascinating. I've had a lot of conversations. A couple of people have been in wheelchairs, and there's been a couple of stories shared with health crises and these diagnoses. But yours is a very different story. And what I love is your positivity, your strength, what you've learned from it, the way that you have continually said over and over again, you get to choose. And you've learnt that firsthand. And I think we all get to choose how we live our life.
Yeah, we do.
We really do.
One of the things my wife and I did when my children were growing up, they were getting a bit, woe is me, why do I have to put up with this? My wife and I were talking about how we could help them think about it in a different way. Because you can't stop the pain. Much as I really wish I could, I can't. So I can't change it. But what I can do is help them think about it in a different way. So my wife and I became foster parents for disabled children. So all of a sudden in our lives, we had children with no feet, no hands, serious physical deformity, developmental delay, all these types of things. And we would bring these children into our house and our children would become carers for them and go, "Yeah, I really don't, yes, my arm hurts today, but, this kid's got no feet and he's still riding a bike or he's still, playing drums or riding a skateboard or whatever. This child was born with no mouth. How do you even survive that?" So it really helped us see that whilst things can be tough, somebody else has got it tougher. Never forget that. Never forget that somebody else has always got it tougher than you. And I still have bad moments, days, whatever. But I hold on to, I get to choose how I'm going to react to this.
Beautiful. I love that story. Wow. Last question, David, and you may have already answered this, but if there's someone listening to this or watching the video who has had some kind of big health diagnosis that's going to change their life, so anything sort of similar, or they resonate with your story, what would you like to say to them?
It's okay to feel bad. It's all right. Your loss is your loss. Don't let anybody tell you how to deal with your loss. It's okay to feel awful, but one day, I don't know where it is, because for everybody it's going to be different. One day, you will find that thing, that next step, that light, that hope for the future. As Andy Dufresne said, hope is a wonderful thing. No, it is.
Perfect. Perfect way to finish up. Thank you so much, David, for your story.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Kintsugi Heroes. Please like and share the show to your friends so we can get this out to even more people. If you have a story you'd like to share with us, please reach out using the contact details below. And join us next week for our next hero's story. Until then, keep being you, and remember that we are all heroes in our own unique way.
Only when it's broken.